For 11 days, my husband had everyone convinced I was losing my mind. My coworkers, my pastor, even my best friend hesitated on the phone. But I wasn't losing my mind. He was stealing it. And that doctor he paid to confirm it? He made one mistake. One mistake that cost them everything. My name is Janelle Price. I was 36 years old, a senior accountant at Robinson & Associates, a Black-owned CPA firm on Beatties Ford Road in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had 2 children, Naomi, who was 8 and too sharp for her own good, and Marcus Jr., who was 5 and believed every problem in the world could be fixed with a hug. I had a husband named Corey who brought me lunch at the office twice a week. I had a mortgage, a modest savings account, and a life that looked from the outside like everything was fine. 3 months before all of this started, my Aunt Vivian died. Aunt Viv raised me after my mother passed when I was 9 years old. She was a retired high school principal who spent 30 years at West Charlotte High, the kind of woman who kept files on everything: report cards, tax receipts, letters she'd written to parents in 1987 that she still had copies of in 2023. She believed in documentation the way other people believe in prayer. "A smart woman keeps her own books," she used to tell me, standing in her kitchen in McCrory Heights with a cup of coffee and a sharpened pencil. I thought she was talking about accounting. I was a teenager. I didn't understand yet that she was talking about everything. When she died, she left me $675,000 in cash and a 4-unit apartment building in the Cherry neighborhood worth $890,000, over $1.5 million total. I was a woman who earned about $74,000 a year. Good money, honest money, but the kind of money where you still double-check the grocery total before you swipe your card. Aunt Viv's inheritance was 21 times my annual salary. It wasn't just money. It was a different life. It was Naomi's college fund, Marcus Jr.'s future, the kind of security my own mother never had, and the kind Aunt Viv spent her whole life building so she could hand it to me. I remember sitting at the kitchen table the week after the funeral, looking at the trust documents and thinking, this changes everything. My children will never worry the way I worried. The problem started about a month after the funeral. At first, it was small things. I found my car keys in the refrigerator. I know that sounds like a joke, but I was standing in the kitchen at 6:45 in the morning, already running late for drop-off, and there they were on the second shelf next to the orange juice. I did not remember putting them there. I didn't remember a lot of things anymore. I missed an appointment with Naomi's teacher that I was certain I had written in my calendar. I checked. The entry was gone. I stood in the school parking lot scrolling through my phone, flipping back and forth across the week, and it simply wasn't there. I could have sworn I'd typed it in on Sunday evening, sitting at the kitchen table. But the calendar didn't lie. Did it? Then there was the fog. That's the only word I have for it. I'd be sitting at my desk at Robinson & Associates, running a client's quarterly reconciliation, numbers I could do in my sleep, and suddenly the figures would swim. I'd blink, lose my place, have to start the column over again. This was happening to me, a woman who could trace a 3-year depreciation schedule from memory. Numbers had been my language since I was 14 years old. Now they were blurring. Corey noticed. Of course he noticed. "Babe, you left the stove on again," he said one evening, his voice soft with concern. He was standing in the kitchen doorway holding Marcus Jr. on his hip, looking at me like I was something fragile. "That's the second time this week?" I didn't remember leaving the stove on, but I didn't remember a lot of things. "Maybe you're pushing yourself too hard," he said. He sat down beside me on the couch and took my hand. "With Aunt Viv passing, the inheritance paperwork, the kids, work, it's a lot, Nell. Nobody would blame you for being overwhelmed." He started showing up at my office more often. Not just the regular lunches, but dropping by at random, bringing coffee, asking my coworkers how I seemed. "Just checking on my wife," he'd say with that smile, that concerned husband smile. He told our pastor he was worried about me. Pastor Davis called me on a Wednesday afternoon, his voice careful and measured. "Janelle, Corey mentioned you've been having some difficulties. We're praying for you, sister." I hadn't told Pastor Davis anything. Corey had. He posted on Facebook once. I saw it later. "Asking for prayers for my wife's health. She's been struggling lately. We appreciate your love and support." 43 people liked it. 22 left comments. My own cousin Trina sent me a message asking if I was okay because Corey told her I'd been forgetting things. My husband was building a narrative. I just didn't know it yet. I found someone really good, Corey said one evening after the kids were in bed. Dr. Raymond Warren comes highly recommended. He specializes in cognitive issues and stress-related conditions. I looked at him. You think I need a psychiatrist? I think you need someone to talk to, babe. Someone professional. You've been through a lot with losing Aunt Viv and these symptoms. He reached for my hand again. That gentle touch. I just want to make sure you're okay. The first appointment was that following Tuesday. Dr. Warren's office was on the 3rd floor of a medical building off South Boulevard. Nice office, leather chairs, diplomas on the wall from 2 universities, one in North Carolina and one in South Carolina. I noticed that because my eyes have always done what they do in a new room, reading everything, cataloging it, filing it away somewhere in the back of my mind. The North Carolina diploma was crisp, framed in dark wood. The South Carolina one was slightly older, the frame a shade lighter. I noted it the way an accountant notes a number that's slightly off. Then I moved on. Dr. Warren was calm, professional, attentive. He asked about the fog, the forgotten appointments, the keys. He took notes. He nodded in all the right places. At the end of the session, he prescribed a low-dose antidepressant and recommended we meet twice a week. I'll pick up the prescription on the way home, Corey said when I told him. Don't worry about it, babe, I got it. He picked up every refill after that, every single one. Corey's mother, Lorraine, started visiting more frequently around this time. Before Aunt Vivian passed, Lorraine came by maybe once a month, a Sunday afternoon. Pleasant enough, but not close. We had one of those in-law relationships that lived in the polite middle distance. She brought pound cake. I made sweet tea. We talked about the children and the weather and the Lord's goodness. But after my symptoms started, Lorraine began coming every week, sometimes twice. She'd sit at my kitchen table, watching me with quiet, careful eyes, and say things like, "You do look tired, baby. Maybe Corey's right about you getting some rest." Or, "Have you been taking your medication? The doctor says it's important, Janelle." She'd ask my children how Mommy was doing. "Is Mommy remembering to pick you up on time?" she asked Naomi once with a sweet, careful smile. "Is Mommy sleeping a lot?" I told myself it was love. A mother-in-law checking on a daughter-in-law who was struggling. She brought food. She tidied up. She hugged me at the door and said she'd pray for me. But every visit left me feeling smaller, like I was being watched, like I was failing a test I didn't know I was taking. The symptoms got worse. Or I believe they did. I came home from work one afternoon and couldn't find the folder with Aunt Vivian's estate documents. I kept it in my home office, second drawer of my desk, because that is where I have kept important documents since I was 22 years old. It was not there. I searched the entire office, the living room, the bedroom. Nothing. "Nell, you moved those files to the kitchen last week," Corey said, his voice patient. "Don't you remember? You were going through them at the table." I did not remember doing that. The folder was on top of the microwave. I know I did not put it there. But I couldn't be certain anymore. That was the thing about those months. I could not be certain of anything. About a month after the funeral, Aunt Vivian's attorney had sent a formal letter asking me to contact her office regarding the estate at my earliest convenience. A woman named Deborah Quinte. Corey brought in the mail that day. He read it, folded it, and set it on the counter. "Just legal paperwork," he said. "I'll handle it. You've got enough on your plate." I never called Deborah Quinte. Naomi said something one evening, casual, the way children deliver devastating information without knowing what they're holding. She was on the couch doing homework. "Daddy was in your office moving your folders again," she said without looking up. "He does that a lot." I paused. "What do you mean, again?" She shrugged. "He goes in there when you're at work sometimes, moves stuff around." Corey walked in with dinner before I could ask more, and the moment passed. I filed it in the back of my mind. I was too foggy to follow the thread. But something, some dim light behind the fog, flickered. Work was the one place I still felt like myself, even on the worst days. Robinson and Associates was small, 12 people, but it was family. Mr. Robinson had built that firm from a one-room office in 1991, and every person who walked through the door knew they were part of something. My colleague Sharon brought me tea when I looked tired. Marcus, our junior analyst, covered my overflow without being asked. "You good, Nell?" Mr. Robinson asked me one afternoon, leaning against my office doorframe. He was 71 years old and still arrived at 7:30 every morning. "I'm good," I said, "just tired." He studied me for a long moment. "Your numbers are still the best in the building. Remember that." I held on to those words. On the days when the fog was thick and Corey was gentle and Lorraine was watching and Dr. Warren was prescribing, I held on to those words like a rope. Corey never liked hearing about the firm. Whenever I mentioned the people at work checking on me, he'd smile and change the subject. "That's nice, babe. You should really be focused on resting, not pushing yourself." I didn't think anything of it at the time. I want to be honest about something. During those months, I doubted myself, truly and deeply. I am a woman who reconciles financial statements for a living, who catches discrepancies that other accountants miss. That was who I was, but the fog made me question all of it. Was I losing my mind? Was the grief doing something to my brain? Some mornings I sat in my car in the parking lot for 5 minutes before going into the office, just running through the day in my head to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Some nights I lay in bed beside Corey and thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I am sicker than I think. He was so patient, so gentle, so present. He never raised his voice, never accused me of anything, just that soft concern, that careful watching, those little touches on my arm. "I'm here for you, Nell. Whatever you need." That is what gaslighting looks like when it is done well. It doesn't look like cruelty. It looks like love. It looks like the person closest to you wrapping their arms around you while they slowly take the floor out from under your feet. And you don't realize you're drowning because the water rises so slowly you think you're just getting shorter. You start apologizing for things you didn't do. You start thanking the person who's destroying you for being patient with you. And the worst part? You believe them. Because why would the man you married, the father of your children, the person who brings you lunch and holds your hand, why would he lie? It was a Thursday evening in October when everything changed. I was putting Naomi to bed. Marcus Jr. was already asleep in his room, and Naomi was propped up on her pillow in her pajamas with a library book about marine biology, because my daughter wanted to be a marine biologist, a veterinarian, and the president, all at the same time. "Mommy," she said, setting the book down. Her voice was matter-of-fact, plain, the way children speak when they have no idea they're about to change your life. "I saw Daddy put something in your vitamin bottle yesterday. Is that your new medicine from the doctor?" I stopped tucking the blanket. "What did you say, baby?" "Yesterday morning, before you woke up. He was in the bathroom and he opened your vitamin bottle and put something inside. Then he closed it and put it back." She said this the way she'd tell me about a bird she saw at recess. "Is it from Dr. Warren? Because it looked different than the other ones." "Different how?" "Smaller and a different color. The ones before were round and white. These were more like oval and kind of yellow." I kissed her forehead, kept my voice steady. "Thank you for telling me that, baby. Go to sleep." I walked to the bathroom and stood in front of the medicine cabinet for a full minute before I opened it. My hands were still. My mind was doing something it hadn't done in months. It was thinking clearly. I took out the vitamin bottle. The pills inside were oval, slightly yellowish. The label said the same thing it always said, the name of the antidepressant Dr. Warren had prescribed. But the pills did not match what I remembered from the first month. The originals had been round, white, smaller. I held one up to the bathroom light, turned it over, set it down on the edge of the sink. Then I went to the kitchen, took a small plastic bag from the drawer, and sealed 2 pills inside. For the first time in 4 months, the fog felt like it had a shape, like it had edges I could trace with my fingers, like it was not something happening to me, but something being done to me. I did not say a word to Corey. He was in the living room watching television, feet up on the ottoman, relaxed, the picture of a man with nothing to worry about. I told him I was going to bed early. "Get some rest, babe," he said without looking away from the screen. "You need it." I lay in the dark and held the plastic bag between my fingers, like evidence. Because that is exactly what it was. That is what my 8-year-old daughter had just handed me. The next morning, I drove to Atrium Health on my lunch break. Renee Holloway had been my best friend since our freshman year at Johnson C. Smith University. She was a surgical nurse, smart, direct, the kind of woman who looked you dead in the eye and told you the truth even when the truth was ugly. "I need you to look at something," I said, handing her the plastic bag. She held it up to the light. "These are your meds? They're supposed to be the antidepressant Dr. Warren prescribed, but Naomi says she saw Corey switching the pills in the bottle." Renee's face changed. Not shock, something sharper, harder, the look she got when she spotted a complication before the surgeon did. "Give me 24 hours, she said. "I'll run them through the pharmacy analyzer." I drove back to the office, sat at my desk, opened a client file, and for the first time in 4 months, I did not feel foggy. I felt something else entirely. Something bright and hard and focused, like a number that finally balances after you've been searching for the error for hours. Something was wrong with those pills. And if the pills were wrong, then what else was wrong? I was an accountant. My entire career was built on one skill, finding what doesn't add up. And nothing about the last 4 months of my life added up. Renee called me the next evening. I was in the bathroom with the door locked and the faucet running so Corey wouldn't hear. "Nell." Her voice was different, stripped of the warmth I'd known since freshman year, clinical, careful. "Those pills are not what the label says." I gripped the edge of the sink. "The prescription label says it's a standard antidepressant. What's actually in those pills is a compound that causes memory impairment, confusion, and disorientation. It's not a medication anyone would prescribe for depression or anxiety or grief. It's the kind of thing that makes you lose your keys, miss appointments, forget conversations you definitely had." She paused. "Janelle, somebody switched your medication, and based on what Naomi told you, we both know who." The bathroom tiles were cold under my bare feet. I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the woman I'd been 4 months ago. Thinner, darker under the eyes. But her eyes were clear. For the first time in months, they were clear. "Are you hearing me?" Renee said. "Nell, you are not losing your mind. Someone has been drugging you." "I hear you," I said. "You need to stop taking those pills. Today. Right now. And you need to start thinking very carefully about what is happening in your house." I stopped taking the pills that night. I flushed what was left and replaced them with actual vitamin supplements from the drugstore, so Corey wouldn't notice the bottle was empty. Same bottle, same place in the medicine cabinet. He wouldn't look twice. Within 72 hours, the fog lifted. I cannot describe what that felt like to someone who hasn't lived through it. Imagine being underwater for 4 months. Everything muffled. Everything slow. Your own thoughts like fish swimming past that you can't quite catch. And then one morning you break the surface. The air hits your face. The world is sharp and bright and loud, and you can think again. I remember the first clear morning. I woke up and the bedroom had edges. The light on the ceiling was crisp. Marcus Jr. was laughing in the hallway and the sound was full and round, not muted the way it had been. I made breakfast and remembered every step. I drove to work and didn't second-guess a single turn. I sat at my desk and finished a client reconciliation in 40 minutes that had taken me 3 hours the week before. Sharon looked over from her desk and said, "There she is. There's our Nell." I smiled. She had no idea what those words meant to me. I was Janelle Price again, the woman with the sharpest forensic mind in the building. And the first clear thought I had was this: if the pills were wrong, what else was wrong? I made a list. At my desk, in a new folder on my work computer that I labeled Quarterly Audit Review, so no one would look twice, I began documenting everything. The keys in the refrigerator, the missing calendar entry, the estate folders moved to the microwave, Corey picking up every prescription himself, Lorraine's weekly visits, and the questions she asked my children, Dr. Warren's twice-weekly sessions and his calm, nodding, note-taking act, the Facebook post, the calls to Pastor Davis, the letter from Deborah Kinte that Corey had intercepted. I wrote down dates, times, details, cross-references, because that is what an accountant does when the numbers don't add up. You don't panic, you don't accuse. You build the ledger. You follow every line. and you don't say a word until you've traced every discrepancy to its source. That afternoon, I did something I should have done 3 months earlier. I found the letter from Deborah Kinney still in the kitchen drawer under a stack of takeout menus where Corey had buried it, and I called the number on the letterhead. Deborah Kinney's office was on the 4th floor of a building on West Trade Street in Uptown Charlotte. She was 58 years old, a black woman with silver-streaked locks and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She looked like the kind of attorney who had seen everything the world could do to a woman, and was surprised by none of it. When I walked in and introduced myself, she set down her pen, removed her glasses, and looked at me with an expression I will never forget: relief and readiness. "I've been waiting 3 months for this call," she said. "Sit down, baby." She told me Aunt Vivian had hired her 6 years ago, not just to manage the trust, to protect it. "Your aunt was the most prepared woman I ever represented," Deborah said. She told me, and I'm quoting her exactly, "Deborah, if that man ever makes a move on what I'm leaving my niece, Janelle will call you. Be ready." The trust had 2 provisions Corey didn't know about. The first was a spendthrift clause, which meant no creditor, no lender, and no third party could access the funds under any circumstances. The second was a conservator exclusion. No guardian, no conservator, no power of attorney holder could access or redirect the trust's assets. Even if Corey somehow obtained legal conservatorship over me, the money was untouchable. The apartment building was titled in the trust's name, with me as sole beneficiary. Aunt Vivian had built a vault around that inheritance, and only I had the key. "Your aunt didn't just leave you money, Janelle," Deborah said. "She left you a fortress, and she paid me $15,000 to make sure no one could breach it." Then Deborah opened a desk drawer and placed a sealed manila envelope on the table between us. My name was written on the front in Aunt Vivian's handwriting, that careful teacher's cursive I'd known my whole life. "She gave me this 4 years ago," Deborah said. "Told me to hold it until you needed it." I opened the envelope with steady hands. Inside were handwritten pages, notes, dated, going back 4 years. The kind of documentation a retired principal keeps on a student who is headed for trouble. But these weren't about a student. They were about Corey. Aunt Viv had been watching my husband for years. She documented the way he asked about my finances at Thanksgiving dinner. Casual questions that weren't casual at all. The time she overheard him on the phone discussing a property deal that sounded over-leveraged. The Sunday he spent 20 minutes asking her about the Cherry apartment building, value, rental income, zoning. "Just curious," he said. The evening she saw him studying the documents on her dining room table when he thought she was in the other room. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before she died. It read, "This man is building a house of cards. When it falls, he'll reach for hers. Don't let him." My aunt had known. She saw what I couldn't see, because love makes you blind, and loyalty makes you still. She couldn't tell me directly because I would have defended him. I would have said, "Aunt Viv, you're being unfair. Corey loves me." So she didn't tell me. She prepared instead. She built the fortress. She wrote the notes. She told Deborah to wait. I pressed the pages against my chest and closed my eyes. Deborah put a hand on my shoulder and said nothing. There was nothing to say. "What do you want to do?" she asked when I opened my eyes. "I want to know everything," I said. "Everything he's doing, everything he's planning. And then I want to stop him." Deborah nodded like she'd been waiting to hear exactly that. "Then we work together. First, you need an independent psychiatric evaluation, a real one, not Warren's theater. Second, you document everything happening at home, dates, times, incidents. Third, we find out who Dr. Raymond Warren really is." "I've already started documenting," I said. She allowed herself a small smile. "Your aunt was right about you." Over the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives. The first was the life Corey saw, the wife who took her pills, which were now drugstore vitamins, the wife who went to Dr. Warren's sessions twice a week and described symptoms she no longer had, the wife who let Lorraine visit and ask her gentle, probing questions about whether Mommy was remembering things better, the wife who smiled and said, "I'm trying, babe," when Corey touched her arm at dinner. I became very good at this performance. Every morning I rubbed my temples slowly, squinted at my phone like the screen was too bright, Asked Corey to repeat things. I left small deliberate mistakes around the house, a cabinet open, a light on in a room I'd left, because I knew he was watching for signs that the pills were still working. And they were working, just not on me anymore. Every time he looked at me with that concerned husband face, I smiled back. Let him believe the fog was winning. Let him think his plan was on schedule. The pastor, the coworkers, Lorraine, they were all watching me for signs of decline. And now, I was watching all of them right back. The hardest part was Lorraine. She came over that first Tuesday, same as always, with a container of chicken and rice and that watchful, warm expression. She sat at my kitchen table and asked me how I was sleeping, whether the medication was helping, whether I'd been remembering things better. A little, I said, keeping my voice soft, a little uncertain. Some days are better than others. Well, you keep taking what the doctor prescribes, she said, patting my hand. Corey worries about you so much, Janelle. We all do. She asked Naomi if Mommy had remembered to sign her permission slip. She asked Marcus Jr. if Mommy had been making dinner every night. Each question was gentle. Each question was a surveillance report. I answered them all with the right amount of confusion, the right amount of gratitude for her concern. And when she left, she hugged me at the door like she always did. I closed the door behind her and stood in the hallway for a full minute without moving. Then I went to my computer and added every question she'd asked to my documentation file. The second life was the real one. Deborah referred me to Dr. Elaine Foster, a board-certified psychiatrist in South Charlotte. No connection to Warren, no connection to Corey. I booked the appointment under my maiden name and paid cash. Dr. Foster spent 2 hours with me. Cognitive tests, memory assessments, verbal reasoning, executive function, standard diagnostic interviews across every category. She was thorough, meticulous, and completely unimpressed with the idea that I was mentally declining. Mrs. Price, she said, pulling up her results on the screen and turning the monitor toward me. Your verbal memory scored in the 97th percentile. Your executive function is well above average. You are cognitively sharp, your memory is intact, and your reasoning is excellent. There is no clinical basis for a diagnosis of cognitive impairment or any form of mental illness. I let out a breath I had been holding for 4 months. However, she said, and the word landed like a stone, I'd like to run a full toxicology panel. The symptoms you described in those early months, the fog, the disorientation, the confusion, are more consistent with chemical exposure than with natural cognitive decline. The blood work came back 3 days later. Dr. Foster called me herself. There are trace compounds in your system consistent with a substance that induces memory impairment and disorientation. These compounds are not naturally occurring, and they are not part of any standard psychiatric medication. She paused. Janelle, this is not a medical issue. This is a criminal matter. 2 sources, 2 independent confirmations, the pharmacy analysis from Renee, the toxicology from Dr. Foster. My husband had been drugging me for 4 months to make me believe I was losing my mind. I knew what had been done to me. Now I needed to know why. What was Corey so desperate for that he would poison his own wife? That weekend, while Corey was at a showing for one of his development projects, I drove to an electronics store on South Boulevard and bought a small digital voice recorder, the kind that looked like a pen. $47. I placed it in the desk drawer of Corey's home office, behind a stack of manila folders, angled toward his chair. He made phone calls in that office every evening after the kids were in bed. He always closed the door. I had never questioned it before. Now I was done not questioning things. The recorder ran for 3 nights before it caught what I needed. On the 4th night, I retrieved it while Corey was in the shower. I sat on the edge of our bed, put in my earbuds, and pressed play. The first voice was Corey's, relaxed, easy. The voice of a man who believed he was alone with someone he trusted. The second voice was a woman's. I did not recognize it then, but I would learn her name soon enough. Warren says 2 more sessions and he can recommend full conservatorship, Corey said. His tone was casual, like he was discussing a dinner reservation, not my life. Once the judge signs off, I liquidate the trust, fund Riverside, and we're clear. And Janelle, the woman said, what about her? Corey laughed, soft and loose like a man who had already won. She'll be so confused from the pills she won't know what year it is. I'll put her in Wellspring for treatment, move the kids to my mother's, and by the time anyone asks questions, the money's moved." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. Then the woman said something I couldn't make out, and Corey responded with the words that ended my marriage. "She was always book smart, Tanya." His voice was fond, almost affectionate, like he was describing a pet he was mildly entertained by. "But she was never life smart. That's why this works." I sat on the edge of that bed and listened to my husband describe how he planned to drug me into silence, lock me in a facility, take my children, and steal everything my aunt had spent a lifetime building so she could leave it to me. Conservatorship, Wellspring, the kids to Lorraine, liquidate the trust, fund something called Riverside. He was paying Dr. Warren. He was sleeping with a woman named Tanya. And he had been putting pills in my vitamin bottle for 4 months, so I would doubt my own mind. I pressed stop. I did not move for a long time. There is a moment in every woman's life when something breaks in a way that cannot be repaired. Not like glass, where you can see the pieces, and maybe, if you're careful, glue them back. This was more like a rope that had been holding something together for years, stretched tight under the weight of love and duty and loyalty, and it finally snapped. When it went, there was no sound, just silence, and then a different kind of strength in its place. The man I married died in that phone call. Not the real Corey. The real Corey had been sitting in that office the whole time, laughing with his girlfriend about putting me in a facility. The Corey who died was the one I had loved. The concerned husband, the gentle hand on my arm, the man who brought me lunch. He was a fiction, a character in a play I'd been watching for 9 years without knowing I was the only one in the audience. Fictions don't deserve grief. They deserve audits. I stood up, put the recorder in my purse, walked to the bathroom, and washed my face with cold water. The woman in the mirror was not foggy. She was not confused. She was not afraid. She was an accountant with a voice recorder, a forensic mind, a fortress of an inheritance, and a dead aunt who had seen this coming before anyone else. Riverside, Wellspring, Tanya, $15,000 to a psychiatrist who would say whatever he was paid to say, a mother-in-law who had been reporting back every week. The case was not finished. I needed to know who Tanya was, what Riverside was, and whether Dr. Raymond Warren had any secrets hiding behind that South Carolina diploma on his wall. But the foundation was built, the ledger was open, and I was done being in the dark. Deborah had told me we needed to find out who Dr. Raymond Warren really was. She put her investigator on it the same week. It didn't take long. Warren's North Carolina license was clean, active, no complaints, no disciplinary action. But his South Carolina license told a different story. In 2021, the South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners suspended Dr. Raymond Warren's psychiatric license for providing false evaluations in a conservatorship case in Charleston. A woman named Helen DeWitt, 53 years old, a retired school bus driver, had been placed under conservatorship after Warren diagnosed her with severe cognitive decline. Her family fought the diagnosis. An independent evaluation proved Helen was mentally sound. Warren's assessment was fraudulent. He had been paid to produce a specific result, and he produced it. Helen DeWitt spent 2 years in a residential care facility before her family got her out. 2 years. A woman lost 2 years of her life because a doctor wrote whatever he was paid to write. Warren's South Carolina license was suspended. He was sued by the DeWitt family and settled out of court. Then he moved to North Carolina, applied for a new license, and got one. The suspension wasn't flagged across state lines. He hung both diplomas on his office wall like they were trophies. I had sat in that office and stared at those frames. The North Carolina one in dark wood, the South Carolina one in a lighter frame. I'd noticed the difference and filed it away without knowing what I was seeing. That was his one mistake. The mistake the title of this story promises you. He could have started fresh, could have left South Carolina behind and been a legitimate doctor in North Carolina, but he didn't. He hung that suspended license on his wall and went right back to doing what he'd done before. Because men like Warren don't stop. They just move, and they count on nobody checking. Dr. Raymond Warren was a predator for hire, and he had done this before. But Deborah's investigator didn't stop at the records. She found Helen DeWitt, alive, recovered, living with her daughter in North Charleston, and furious. Helen agreed to submit a written statement to any court that would hear it. She described what Warren had done to her, the sessions that felt wrong, the diagnosis that didn't match what she knew about her own mind, the facility they put her in, where she spent 23 months asking to go home while her family fought through the legal system to get her out. She wrote, "That man looked me in the eye and told the court I couldn't take care of myself. He knew it was a lie. He did it for money. And if he's doing it to another woman, I want to help stop him." When Deborah read me that statement over the phone, I had to set the phone down on the table and press my hands flat against the wood until they stopped shaking. This was not just my husband scheming to take my inheritance. This was a system, a doctor who sold diagnoses, men who paid him, women who lost years of their lives. And if I hadn't had an 8-year-old daughter who noticed the wrong pills in the wrong bottle, I would have been next. Then came Lorraine. Deborah's investigator pulled phone records. In the 7 days before Corey and Tanya planned to file the conservatorship petition, Lorraine Price called her son 14 times. Not the usual once or twice a week, 14 calls in 7 days. The longest was 43 minutes. She wasn't just visiting me out of concern. She wasn't just asking my children innocent questions. She was coordinating, reporting back, feeding Corey information about my behavior, my mood, my compliance. Every sweet word at my kitchen table had been surveillance. Every hug at the door had been data collection. And those 14 calls in the final week meant she knew exactly what was coming. Lorraine Price had not stumbled into her son's conspiracy. She had helped build it. The last piece was Riverside. On the recording, Corey had said, "Fund Riverside and we're clear." I hadn't known what that meant. Now I did what I should have done from the beginning. I was an accountant. Public financial records were my native language. Riverside Commons was a real estate development project in Corey's name. 3 properties, 3 lenders. Total loan exposure, $1.2 million. The properties were appraised at $1.2 million to justify the loans. But I pulled the county tax assessments, the comparable sales data, and the recent inspection reports. The actual market value of those 3 properties was approximately $700,000. The appraisals had been inflated by 40%. Corey hadn't just overextended himself. He had committed loan fraud, 3 lenders, 3 sets of inflated numbers. If any one of them audited the portfolio, Corey faced federal charges before the conservatorship petition ever reached a judge. He needed my inheritance to cover the gap. $500,000 underwater. That was the number. That was why he was poisoning his wife. Not because he was greedy, though he was. Because he was desperate. And desperate men don't stop at drugging. They file petitions, they pay doctors, they recruit their mothers. I sat at my kitchen table that night, with every piece of evidence organized in front of me. Renee's pharmacy analysis, Dr. Foster's independent evaluation and the toxicology report, the voice recording of Corey and Tanya, Aunt Vivian's 4 years of handwritten notes, Warren's South Carolina suspension records, Helen DeWitt's written statement, Lorraine's phone record showing 14 calls, the Riverside Commons financial documents proving loan fraud, my own documentation file with 47 incidents of gaslighting dated and cross-referenced over 4 months. I called Deborah. "I have everything," I said. "I know you do," she said. "Here's what happens next." I also moved the children's emergency bags to Renee's apartment. Passports, clothes, their favorite books. Not because I expected to run, but because my husband had spent 4 months drugging me, and I was no longer a woman who left anything to chance. Deborah would represent me at the conservatorship hearing. She would let Corey and Tanya file their petition. She would let them present Warren's fraudulent evaluation, Corey's concerned testimony, Lorraine's performance. She would let them build their case in front of the judge, and then she would stand up and take it apart, piece by piece. Dr. Foster would be available as an expert witness. Helen DeWitt's statement would be submitted to the court. Mr. Robinson from the firm had already written a character statement, calling me the sharpest forensic mind he trained in 25 years. Deborah's investigator had every document notarized, dated, and organized into exhibits. "Janelle," Deborah said, "your aunt built you a fortress. You built yourself a case. Now we let them walk into the courtroom thinking they've already won. And then we show them what a smart woman looks like when she's kept her own books." I went to bed that night and slept better than I had in months. The fog was gone. The fear was gone. The grief for the marriage I thought I had, that was gone too. What was left was clarity. A stack of evidence that could fill a courtroom table, a legal team that was ready, and a woman who had spent 4 months being told she was losing her mind by the same people who were stealing it. Tomorrow, Corey and Tanya would file the petition. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I was ready. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. Mecklenburg County Superior Court, Courtroom 4, B, Judge Patricia Hawkins presiding. I arrived at 8:30 with Deborah Kinty beside me. We sat at the respondent's table. Deborah placed the evidence binder between us, 3 inches thick. She did not open it. Not yet. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. 4 months of fog, and now every edge in that courtroom was sharp. Corey walked in at 8:52. Navy suit, pressed shirt, his face arranged in the same practice concern I had watched him perform for 4 months in our living room. Tanya Mitchell was beside him. I had never seen her face before that morning, but I knew her voice. I had listened to it 14 times on a recording she didn't know existed. She was tall, composed, carrying a leather portfolio. His attorney, his lover, his co-conspirator. They sat at the petitioner's table without looking at me. Lorraine arrived next, church clothes. She sat in the first row behind her son and patted his shoulder. She smiled at the judge like a woman who had done nothing wrong. Behind me, Mr. Robinson sat in the gallery with 3 colleagues from the firm. I did not turn around. I didn't need to. Judge Hawkins entered, 30 years on the bench. She called the case number and nodded at the petitioner's table. Tanya presented first, professional, measured. She described a woman in cognitive decline, a woman who could not manage her own affairs. She called Dr. Raymond Warren to the stand. Warren sat in his press suit with his calm, clinical voice and described a patient experiencing progressive memory loss, confusion, and impaired judgment. He recommended full conservatorship. He looked at the judge with the same steady eye he had used on Helen DeWitt in Charleston. Corey testified next. His voice cracked on cue. He described finding me confused in the kitchen, forgetting the children's school schedules, losing track of conversations. He paused, pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose, and said he was scared for me. He said he loved me. He said he only wanted what was best for his family. Lorraine was last. She clasped her hands in her lap and said, "My daughter-in-law has been confused and forgetful for months. I've watched it happen. It breaks my heart." I watched her performance. 4 months of surveillance dressed up as love. They built their case in 47 minutes. It was practiced. It was coordinated. And every single word of it was a lie. Deborah stood. "Your Honor, may I present evidence on behalf of the respondent?" Judge Hawkins nodded. Deborah opened the binder. Exhibit 1, Independent Psychiatric Evaluation by Dr. Elaine Foster, board-certified psychiatrist. Mrs. Price scored in the 97th percentile for verbal memory. Above average executive function. No clinical basis for cognitive impairment or mental illness of any kind. She laid the report on the clerk's table. Warren's jaw tightened. Exhibit 2, Toxicology Panel, also conducted by Dr. Foster. Foreign compounds found in Mrs. Price's blood work, consistent with a substance that causes memory impairment and disorientation. Not naturally occurring. Not part of any standard psychiatric medication. Tanya's pen stopped moving. Exhibit 3, Pharmacy Analysis conducted by Renee Holloway, registered surgical nurse, Atrium Health. The pills prescribed to Mrs. Price under Dr. Warren's name are not the medication indicated on the label. They contain a compound designed to cause confusion, memory loss, and disorientation. Mrs. Price was being drugged. Corey looked at Tanya. She did not look back. Exhibit 4. Deborah's voice was steady as granite. South Carolina Board of Medical Examiners records. In 2021, Dr. Raymond Warren's psychiatric license was suspended for providing false evaluations in a conservatorship proceeding in Charleston. The victim was Helen DeWitt, 53 years old, a retired school bus driver who spent 23 months in a residential care facility based on his fraudulent diagnosis. Warren went white. His hands gripped the armrest of the witness chair. Exhibit 5. Written statement from Helen DeWitt, submitted to this court. Deborah read it aloud. That man looked me in the eye and told the court I couldn't take care of myself. He knew it was a lie. He did it for money. And if he's doing it to another woman, I want to help stop him. The courtroom was silent. Warren did not move. Exhibit 6. Deborah held up a small device. Digital audio recording captured in the petitioner's home office. Corey Price speaking with Tanya Mitchell 7 days before this petition was filed. She pressed play. Every person in that courtroom went still. His voice filled the courtroom. Relaxed, casual. The voice of a man who believed no one was listening. Warren says 2 more sessions and he can recommend full conservatorship. Once the judge signs off, I liquidate the trust, fund Riverside, and we're clear. Then, she'll be so confused from the pills she won't know what year it is. And then the line that ended everything. She was always book smart, Tanya, but she was never life smart. That's why this works. His own words, his own voice, played in open court. I watched the man I married hear his own contempt read back to him in a room full of strangers. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not rage, just clarity, bright and final. Corey's face collapsed. Not anger, not defiance, just the understanding, arriving all at once that everything was over. Lorraine covered her mouth. Tanya set her pen on the table and did not pick it up again. Deborah continued. She presented the trust documents, showing the spendthrift clause and conservator exclusion that made the inheritance untouchable, even with conservatorship. She presented my documentation file, 47 incidents of gaslighting over 4 months, dated, cross-referenced, organized. She presented the Riverside Commons financial records, $1.2 million in loans against $700,000 in actual property value, appraisals inflated by 40%, 3 lenders, federal loan fraud exposure. She presented Lorraine's phone records, 14 calls to Corey in 7 days before the petition was filed. The longest call, 43 minutes. Lorraine looked at the floor. She did not look up again. Deborah presented Mr. Robinson's character statement. The sharpest forensic mind I've trained in 25 years. Then she stepped back. The respondent has nothing further, Your Honor. Judge Patricia Hawkins removed her glasses. She looked at Corey, at Warren, at Tanya, at Lorraine. Then she spoke. In 30 years on this bench, I have seen cases that test my faith in the institutions I serve. This is one of them. She paused. The petition for emergency conservatorship is denied. She was not finished. The court refers Corey Price to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney for criminal investigation, including the drugging of his wife, fraud, and filing a false petition. The court further refers the Riverside Commons matter to federal authorities for investigation of loan fraud. Corey stared straight ahead. His hands were in his lap. He did not move. The court refers Dr. Raymond Warren to the North Carolina Medical Board for immediate license revocation proceedings and to the District Attorney for criminal charges related to fraudulent psychiatric evaluations. Warren stared at the table with both hands flat. The court refers Attorney Tanya Mitchell to the North Carolina State Bar for ethics violations, including filing a fraudulent petition, undisclosed conflict of interest, and conspiracy. Tanya closed her portfolio. The court orders an investigation into Lorraine Price's role in coordinating this scheme. All visitation privileges with the minor children, Naomi Price and Marcus Price Jr., are suspended effective immediately. Lorraine made a sound, small, almost nothing. Emergency sole legal and physical custody of both children is granted to Janelle Price, effective immediately. Judge Hawkins looked at me. Mrs. Price, you were failed by people who owed you protection. Your husband, your doctor, your mother-in-law, the attorney who sat at that table and filed this petition knowing it was built on fraud. But you were not failed by your own mind. The evidence before this court reflects extraordinary competence, clarity, and courage. This court sees you, and this court stands with you. I looked at the judge. I did not cry. Not yet. That would come later, in a quieter place, where no one needed me to be strong. Thank you, Your Honor. Deborah placed her hand on my arm. Behind me, Mr. Robinson exhaled. Across the aisle, Corey sat alone at the petitioner's table. Tanya was already packing her briefcase. She did not speak to him. She did not look at him. Lorraine had not moved from the first row, her hands still pressed over her mouth. Warren sat at the witness stand with his palms flat on the wood, staring at nothing. I stood. I smoothed my jacket. Deborah walked beside me to the doors. In the hallway, Renee was waiting with the children. Naomi took my right hand. Marcus Jr. took my left. We walked into the morning light together. The courthouse doors closed behind us. The consequences came quickly. Corey was arrested 3 days after the hearing. The Mecklenburg County District Attorney filed charges for drugging, fraud, and filing a false conservatorship petition. 2 weeks later, the federal investigation into Riverside Commons opened. 3 lenders, 3 sets of inflated appraisals, $1.2 million in fraudulent loans against $700,000 in actual property value. Corey did not make bail. His new attorney, the one who replaced Tanya, told the court his client's assets were frozen pending the federal inquiry. There was nothing left to post. The North Carolina Medical Board revoked Dr. Raymond Warren's license within 30 days. The revocation was permanent. He would not be moving to another state this time. Criminal charges followed. Helen DeWitt's family in North Charleston filed a second civil suit the same month. Warren's one mistake had finally caught up with him, and it brought everything else down with it. Tanya Mitchell was disbarred by the North Carolina State Bar 11 weeks after the hearing. The ethics investigation found conflict of interest, conspiracy, and filing a petition she knew to be fraudulent. Her investment in Riverside Commons was gone with the properties. She lost her law license and her money on the same page of the same ruling. Lorraine's visitation rights were never restored. The investigation confirmed her coordination. 14 calls, weekly surveillance visits disguised as love, false testimony under oath. She was named in the civil suit Deborah filed on my behalf. I do not know what Lorraine does with her Sundays now. I stopped wondering. I cried that first night. Not in the courtroom, not in the hallway with my children, not in Renee's car on the drive home, but later. After Naomi and Marcus Jr. were asleep and the house was dark and quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried until my chest hurt. Not for Corey, not for the marriage. That grief had died the night I heard the recording. I cried for the 4 months I spent believing something was wrong with my mind, for the mornings I couldn't finish a reconciliation, for the nights I lay next to the man who was poisoning me and thought he was the one holding me together. When it was done, I washed my face with cold water and looked at the woman in the mirror. She looked back at me with clear eyes. The fog was gone. It had been gone for weeks, but this was different. This was the first time I looked at my own reflection and felt no doubt at all. Renee came over the next morning with coffee and a bag of pastries from the bakery on Beatty's Ford Road. She sat at my kitchen table while the children ate cereal in the living room. She didn't ask me how I was feeling. She knew. After a while, she said, "You did it, Nell." I looked at her across the table. "We did it." Mr. Robinson called that afternoon. He said my desk was ready whenever I was. 3 colleagues from the firm had sent cards. Sharon left a voicemail that made me laugh for the first time in days. "There she is," she said. "There's our Nell." Those words meant more than she knew. Deborah came by that weekend with a bottle of wine and a stack of documents to sign. She sat in Aunt Vivian's chair at my kitchen table and looked at me the way she had the first day I walked into her office. Relief. And something deeper than relief. "Your aunt would be proud of you," she said. "She built the fortress, but you're the one who held the line." I signed every page. The trust was intact. The apartment building on Cherry Street was mine. 4 units, tenants steady, value still climbing. $1.5 million in inheritance, protected by a woman who loved me enough to plan for the worst thing she could imagine and build a wall around it before it arrived. The divorce was finalized in the spring. I kept the house, sole custody of both children. Naomi and Marcus Jr. settled into new routines, school and homework, and Saturday mornings at the park. Naomi asked about her father once. I told her the truth in words an 8-year-old could carry. She nodded and went back to her book. She has always been braver than she knows. I went back to work full-time. The numbers were crisp again. Every column, every decimal, every line of every reconciliation, clear and sharp. Mr. Robinson gave me 2 new forensic clients that quarter. I finished both ahead of schedule. On a Sunday morning in late May, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee and watched the light move through the trees. The house was quiet. Naomi was reading at the kitchen table. Marcus Jr. was building something with wooden blocks on the living room floor. The air smelled like cut grass and the jasmine that had come back along the fence. Aunt Vivian used to say, "A smart woman keeps her own books." I thought she meant money. She did mean money. But she also meant this: know what is yours, know what is true. And when someone tries to convince you that your own mind is failing, sit down, open the ledger, and check the numbers. The numbers do not lie. My name is on every document that matters. My children are safe. My mind is clear. And nobody will ever again make me believe otherwise. The coffee was warm. The morning was still. The books were balanced. I was free.